It's now my great honor to introduce today's special guest, co-chair of the Generosity Commission, Jane Wales. Jane Wales is the vice president of the Aspen Institute and executive director of its program on philanthropy and social innovation. She's the founder of the Global Philanthropy Forum and its regional affiliates in Africa and Brazil, and the former host of the nationally syndicated National Public Radio interview show, World Affairs. Previously, Jane served in the Clinton administration as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of the National Security Council. She simultaneously served as Associate Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In the Carter administration, Jane served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Her role as co-chair at the Generosity Commission supports the organization's purpose to increase civic participation among everyday Americans in a way that best reflects their individual passions, values, and circumstances. The Generosity Commission was founded in 2021 in response to the decline of civic engagement with nonprofits in the United States. They work to understand, engage, and support by gaining insight into current trends. In giving across the country, they look at how community members view generosity and share resources with leaders on how to promote everyday giving. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm Hoosier welcome to Jane Wales.
Good afternoon. I have to tell you, my first time I ever knew anything about the Economic Club here, I was 24. My job was to place Jimmy Carter as a speaker here to talk about energy policy. And you accepted him. So this was a victory for me. I was able to place a president in Indianapolis, so I was very, very proud at age 24. So you can imagine how stunned I was when I got invited without even being a president. I'm not even president of the Aspen Institute, let alone of the United States. So, and I do want to acknowledge one person in the audience, although there are lots of wonderful people I know from before and who I'm just meeting. Ted Grossnickel is the person who was the driving force before, in sort of pushing the Generosity Commission. He was the guy, you were chair then of the Giving Institute, isn't that right, Ted? That was your excuse for being, he was absolutely intent on it happening and on having some continuing impact. So Ted, thank you for your service to the world of philanthropy and to everyday giving. So I get to do a sort of a quick brief on the commission, on what our findings were, and on what recommendations we made, and then say a word about where it might go from here. Let me just say that also Amir Persish, who is the head of the dean of the Lilly School, and I worked together for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund years ago when he was fresh out of Yale. Weren't you fresh out of Yale then? I think so. And he was brilliant then, and he stayed brilliant. So it's wonderful to see him again as well. We started as at the Generosity Commission with the proposition that a robust civil society is a singular asset of American democracy. It's a source of agility, of stability, of vibrancy, but importantly of citizen agency, the sense that we can make a difference. And the reality that we can. And the organizations and associations and networks that it comprises really provide forums for us all to kind of come together, to solve problems together, to steward community resources, and to mobilize what I refer to as literal and figurative sort of bucket brigades. It's, of course, powered by everyday givers and everyday volunteers. I spent a lot of my career working for sort of large private foundations, Rockefeller Brothers Fund with Amir, the Carnegie Corporation. So it was marvelous for me to see and learn more about the everyday giver and their importance, not only to solving specific problems, addressing certain ills, advancing a kind of thriving communities, but also in ensuring that our democracy stays a democracy. So I think about sort of everyday givers as folks that coach the Little League, people who volunteer for the volunteer fire brigade, people who, I think most importantly, go to town meetings not only to talk, but also to listen, to persuade, and to decide. And that's, I think, what makes them so important to all of our lives and to the way in which we live and take decisions as a country. And in the process, what they do is they build trust. They build a sense of community. They build our capacity to self-govern. And it is that reason that when Ted came to me and asked me to co-chair this commission, that I thought, this is important. This is truly important. It's not just about the amount of money given. It is about what goes into that, what civic engagement means to our society and to our economy. Having said that, what the Lilly School has told us is that their numbers have dropped precipitously. So while there's a robust, the dollars given are high, they're higher in 2024 than any other year. The fact is the number of givers has gone down. There's a concentration at the top. And so you can see from this slide that about 16%, there was about a 16% drop in the 10 years shortly after the Great Recession. Perhaps that's not as surprising, but it has gone from 65.4% back in 2008 to 47% last year. That's concerning. And so year over year, what we're seeing is more money is given, but by fewer givers. And year over year, we see more volunteer hours are donated, but by fewer volunteers. We tried to understand why. But let me just say that that what motivated the commission, again, was not dollars raised. It was a question of what it means, what these trends portend for our resilience as a society and for the strength of our democracy. And that's why Giving Institute and Giving USA decided to stand up the commission. I was joined as co-chair by Mike Giannone, who is CEO of Blackbaud and a wonderful partner. Our remit was to celebrate and support everyday givers and volunteers and to illuminate their role in our society, their importance to our society and our democracy, and finally to recommend ways to reverse this decline, to expand their numbers. We had our going-in assumptions were twofold. We had two hypotheses, and I'd be really interested in hearing yours. The first was, of course, economic. There was a shrinking middle class. There was a concentration of wealth. And there had been shocks to our economy. There'd been the recession. There'd been the COVID pandemic. And now we still have a level of uncertainty with the introduction of artificial intelligence, an entirely new technology that we don't quite know what the net effect will be on our economy. There are many reasons to believe that it'll vastly, improve our financial standing, but there are many reasons to believe it'll be very, very disruptive. So that sense of precarity, that sense of uncertainty that came with the recession, came with COVID, still lives on, in part because of artificial intelligence and in part because of policy change. Tariffs, we don't know what the net effect will be. But the second reason, we didn't conclude that it was just economic, and it's easy to assume that it's just economic reasons that keep people from giving and volunteering. We kept hearing from social scientists who would tell us about the rise in social isolation that's so much a part of our technology age, and the decline of social trust. To what degree did those two factors weigh into a decision not to give, not to volunteer? Before I go too far on that, let me just say there can be economic reasons not to volunteer, and that is if you have to take a second job or go into the gig economy, you've lost the free time that would have gone into volunteering. So I'm not diminishing the importance of that. We commissioned research that was important to us. Obviously, from the Lilly School, what we learned about were these trends and that they were ongoing. From the Urban Institute, we learned that those most harmed were the small, community-based organizations. And remember, that's the majority of the nonprofit sector, so that's significant. From University of Pennsylvania, what we learned is while the number of donors decreased pretty dramatically during COVID, the dollars did not, because people upped their giving by overall over 200%. We learned from Stanford University that folks were giving in novel ways. That's, GoFundMe, it's rounding up the bill at the point of sale, it's mutual aid, it's impact investing, the various ways which were not necessarily being captured in data over time. There was this change undergoing. And then finally from University of Maryland, which has this an institute with the marvelous name of Do Good Institute, we learned that educational attainment is the biggest predictor of volunteering, and that age and obviously to some extent accumulated wealth over time is the greatest predictor of giving. But my favorite finding from the Do Good Institute was that civic engagement begets civic engagement, that those who join a membership organization are most likely to volunteer for that organization or another, to give to that organization or another, that those who have volunteered for the first time are most likely to then go register to vote for the first time in national elections. And the same is true, apparently, with jury service. Those who have served on a jury for the first time get a sense that they can make a difference, get a sense that they must make a difference, that it's part of their responsibility. They tend to engage more in volunteering and giving as well, and to register to vote. The recommendations we came up with were more on the infrastructure side. First, to increase the data available to us, and for analysis reasons, but also to increase trust in the sector. The organization I work for had been very involved in trying to encourage the release of the IRS's data on nonprofit, sort of nonprofit data, and giving. We're now working with Giving Tuesday on building a data commons that goes beyond that source of data and on to capture all the ways in which we give. I have to say again that Indianapolis ought to be very proud, because a driving force in all of this is the Lilly School. They're always several steps ahead of everyone else on the core research, on understanding the underlying dynamics that are going on. And I don't say that because I'm prejudiced for Amir, although I'm very prejudiced for Amir. If you've ever worked with Amir, you would be incredibly prejudiced for Amir, but that isn't why I'm saying that. I'm saying that because we at the Commission relied so heavily on it, and now I see how the sector at large relies on it, and what a kind of, the Lilly School is always ahead of everyone else and influences the rest of us. Another recommendation we made is that the need to support community foundations, the sense that community foundations serve those who have DAFs, but don't tend to serve the everyday giver. When we think about community foundations, we assume that community foundations are doing the job of building community. They want to do the job of building community. But if you look at their business model, several will say to you, gee, my reliance on DAFs is such that I have the money I need to do fundraising, I have the money I need to manage finances and the assets under management, and I have the flexibility I need in order to execute on the grants that our DAF holders want. But I don't have the kind of flexibility I want to be proactively building community in the way in which I really am passionate about doing. And so several of us are working with 10 community foundations, their CEOs and their CFOs, to think through how you evolve that business model. Now, let me just say again, for Indiana, the Lilly Endowment has been an extraordinary leader in terms of helping out community foundations, with 30 of the community foundations receiving among them $171 million last year. to strengthen their capacity, which is extraordinary. We're working with the business model innovation, but also donor segmentation as you think about everyday givers. How do you think about donor segmentation? Finally, almost finally, our recommendations include recommending that we advance policies, particularly tax policies, that create incentives for the everyday giver. The Senate Finance Committee staff reached out to us, and I have to say, not only did they ask for advice, but they took our advice, which was a positive thing. We'll probably talk more about that, Ted, when you come up. And then finally, we made a recommendation that there be full funding for the IRS and state regulators when it comes to compliance. That was the least of the recommendations we put forth, the one that has been least acted upon for two reasons. One, it's an era of deregulation generally, but also there's, the budget cuts are such, it's the wrong time to ask for more money. At least that's what we've learned thus far. The recommendations that perhaps were most important, though, in my view, were the recommendations that focused on the players as opposed to the infrastructure, although I'm a big believer in infrastructure building. But that we think about sort of shining the spotlight on the leaders in all fields that are engaged in giving and volunteering. I mean, I'm talking about cultural icons. I'm talking about musicians. I'm talking about actors. I'm talking about sports figures. The number of Americans that are engaged day to day in some form of volunteering, some form of giving, is quite extraordinary. But we only hear about, Taylor Swift and Steph Curry or whatever you hear about here. But you know what I mean? We don't know how pervasive it is. I often tell Ted that, civil society is like oxygen. You only notice it when it goes away. It was only after I was on the commission that I thought back and said, well, wait, I was born in a nonprofit hospital. My mother was diagnosed with cancer in my first year of life and was cured because of philanthropic donations to medical science. I, a Protestant kid, learned how to swim at the Jewish Community Center, and nobody asked me to make a pledge at the door. It was just generosity. I joined the Brownies and the Blue Jays and you name it. I was a candy striper, and still I'd never heard the phrase civil society, let alone known that I was engaged in it and benefiting from it every year of my life. I also had a scholarship to college, so I really did. At that point, I realized what I was getting out of the pervasiveness of generosity in our society. We also wanted to reinforce the role of business. So many Americans have as their first opportunity to give, their first experience with volunteering, being on the workplace. And I've just come from running a seminar for the grantees of Apollo Global Management. There, not only do they give generous grants to a marvelous set of grantees, but they have deal teams of senior executives who work with those grantees on whatever those grantees need. So if they need to better understand AI, they've got a deal team to work with them. If they need to better understand financial forecasting, they've got real pros to work with them. The extraordinary things that corporate foundations do and the engagement of their executives, their employees, is truly meaningful. But to tell that story was something we thought important to do. And then to listen to the next generation. I think of how many kids I meet who come into the nonprofit sector because when they were juniors, they took a semester to Guatemala. I mean, I'm just giving one example, and worked with people who lived on $1 a day. They gained a sense of purpose. They entered with a sense of purpose, but most importantly, they left with a sense of agency, that they could, as 18-year-olds, make a difference. I can think of no greater gift to an 18-year-old than that, and a no greater gift to our society. Ted has heard me say this before, and we're in violent agreement, and that is that we started to wonder, is evidence enough for changing behavior? Are good recommendations enough for changing behavior? Is access to policymakers enough for changing behavior? And we kind of thought, no, really it takes stories. It takes relatable stories. It takes stories we can identify with, we can picture ourselves in. stories that show us the way of how to engage, and stories told by Americans of all walks with whom we can identify. And so in many ways, the most important, and we hope most lasting recommendation of ours is to launch a national conversation, one in which we hear from, when we take this room, hear from each table what your own experience is, your own passion is, and how you're acting on it. You cannot help but walk away feeling optimistic about our society and feeling empowered to be a true civic actor. So we're a believer in the national conversation. We are also, we wanted to make sure that we weren't the last word, that the last word rests with the everyday givers and everyday volunteers themselves. So the Giving Institute, and with the help of Lee Ernst and others, are devising a plan for a national conversation. They face a remarkable opportunity. I'm going to keep going, but the point here is that they want this to be a living document that constantly is improved. Here I'm going to add my own opinion, because you can get away with this when you're a co-chair, or actually you have to do a lot more listening, but I've just been handed a microphone, so I'm going to act differently. And that opportunity is that next year is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a foundational document, one that defined our role, individuals' role in relationship to the governed, the one that stated very clearly that the government is there due to the consent of the governed. There is a growing desire to take part, and we're involved in it in my organization, but many other organizations, in a campaign that we're calling for now, Be the People. It's a broad-based public conversation spanning political divides. It's a 10-year, it's actually 11 years, but we call it 10 years because it sounds better. But it is, it's launched with the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration. It comes to closure 11 years later with the signing of the Constitution, the adoption of the Constitution. It is an opportunity to tell the story of our founders, to recommit to our democratic ideals, to reaffirm the role of the engaged citizen, and to reaffirm the role of civil society as having two really central attributes on which right, left, and center can agree. And that is, first, pluralism. You can't rule out of order people who disagree with you, that they have a right and their organization has a right and a responsibility to speak up, make their case, do the work that they think is important. So pluralism being a really central and defining attribute of civil society. And the second defining attribute being independence. Independence from control of others. Your boards take your decisions, you represent and work with the people in your community. It's just a way of being. It's a way of solving problems. It is it's American democracy at work. I've lived in and been in other democracies. They don't have this unique attribute of a strong civil society. I look back in my lifetime, I remember when Tahrir Square happened in Egypt, and those brave young people toppled Mubarak's government pretty much overnight, but they couldn't stand up a follow-on government because they'd had no experience with self-governance. There was no civil society in Egypt at the time. And so we ended up with the Muslim Brotherhood, which was not their goal. But it was interesting for me to see the distinction between a well-meaning movement without the experience of civil society. Just to say a word about the partners in this particular activity, I'm raising this only to show you that it spans political points of view, political divides. Stand Together, which is a coalition of foundations, which tend to be conservative foundations. More Perfect, which is a coalition of companies. Imagine Entertainment, which is Ron Howard's production firm. Live Aid Producers, you know of them, the musicians of 1985. Rethink Media, which is a bottom-up stories, ideas, source of story ideas. Giving Tuesday, bottom-up giving. Aspen Institute is a knowledge partner in this, and I raise it only to say this is a profound opportunity for us all to be expressing what it is to us to be American. What is Americanness? And what role does generosity play in Americanness? And I hope we all have all kinds of different points of view, but know how valuable they are. I'm going to stop there and invite Ted to come up and ask some tough questions.
At the beginning of the work of the commission, we were all acutely aware that there perhaps are not many famous committees of history. But then, if you start to think about the group that produced the Declaration of Independence, the Constitutional Convention, and a few others, it became clear that there was certainly the potential if we could get it right. And one of the things that you spoke about was one of the recommendations, which perhaps in large measure because of the work of the commission and the report ended up being in the most recent legislation, the big, beautiful bill, including an increase in charitable deductibility. The first question that I would have for you, and I'm going to ask just a few of Jane, and then we're going to be very interested in having questions from all of you as well. But given that act, are you sanguine, Jane, that is going to produce an increase in giving, if not immediately, then in coming years?
Yeah, and you'll let me know if this, it is working, good. So first, an important caveat, and that is that it relates to the 2026 tax year. And so we won't know for a while what its impact is and how great that impact is. Oh, you folks, I'm so sorry you're behind the podium. I will lean forward. So number one, just have that caveat. Number two, yes, indeed, they did introduce now a taxpayer who takes the standard deduction can deduct gifts they make over and above the ceiling of the deduction. That's good news. How broad that impact will be is determined a little bit by the next decision they took, and that was to raise the standard deduction significantly. I mean, I think it's over 16,000 for an individual and something like 32,000. Is that right, Ted? For a married couple filing jointly. So there aren't that many Americans who can give at that rate over and above the standard deduction. So it'll probably reduce the number of people who are effectively incentivized. They might feel the incentive anyway, but effectively incentivized. But I think both decisions are probably the right ones. Both decisions are good for middle-income Americans, and both decisions are good for middle-income giving. So I feel good about it, although I would have loved it to be even more substantial, or reached a wider swath of everyday givers. But we're grateful to the committee for, there are lots of commissions in Washington, as you know, and not every Senate staffer is dying to reach out and hear from them. And so we were grateful that they not only reached out, but in fact took the recommendations made.
Thank you very much. And we were very much encouraged by the response from those staffs and from senators, including our own Senator Todd Young, as an early supporter of this, and it made a difference. So we have early evidence, I would think, that some of the recommendations are in fact getting traction. Jane, as you noted, overall giving last year was on the order of $492 billion. We think that part of the reasons for this were that you had a very robust stock market, GDP, unemployment was low. The same looks like it's in place right now. I guess my next question, Jane, is, given those things, do you have comments about continuing hesitance we still see on the part of donors? And are we looking at all the donors that are can have a role, can have agency?
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. I mean, folks who are members of the Economic Club, this is one of those rare places where you can talk about precarity and not have everybody fall asleep on you, or wonder if you're just showing off, in my case, because I only learned that word, maybe a decade ago, maybe. But the uncertainty, continued uncertainty, can have as much impact as what's in the bank today, right? And I think my father was 16 when the Great Depression hit. They had led a comfortable life till then, and suddenly at age 16, he had to support his parents. That shock never went away. He was such a penny pincher, arguing over whether you actually needed to have new shoes for school would be, because for him, the Great Depression was always just, a minute away, regardless of all evidence. We have a similar situation in which, not quite as dramatic as the Great Depression, but the recession was a shock to every American, or to those Americans who didn't know the word precarity, like me. And COVID's impact was, we were not emotionally, intellectually prepared as sort of everyday economic actors for a pandemic and the impact that has. And now, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think we don't know the net effect on our individual well-being of artificial intelligence. I read in the paper that both Amazon and Walmart, or two of our biggest retailers in the country, are looking at whether big layoffs are needed. Amazon is making huge layoffs. And Walmart is saying, we're going to stay at the same number of employees, but they'll be doing different things. So what does that mean for you in that role? I should say that in Indianapolis, Walmart is hiring. It is. So that's a good sign. But it's just, we really literally don't know. On the tariffs, 100% tariffs on China was a temporary disruption for soybean farmers here in Indiana. Because the Chinese responded by saying, okay, we won't buy from the U.S., we'll buy from Brazil, nice knowing you. Fortunately, in the president's last visit, this was all reversed. So there's good news at the end of that one. We removed those tariffs. The Chinese are saying they're going to come back, they're going to buy even this year from American farmers. But these kinds of things that you sort of don't know tomorrow what will happen, and you don't know what the implications are for you, make you hesitate. I was saying the one place where a different segment of our giving of our society is corporate and corporate foundations, and what I'm seeing there is a hesitancy, not so much in their giving, they're still giving, but a hesitancy when it comes to paid internships, entry-level jobs, that those are shrinking. So for those of you who work for nonprofits that are helping young people make it through good schools, good college, experience, and then make it through to their first applicants, suddenly they don't have the options I had when I graduated from college, when there were all kinds of entry-level jobs available. So you're seeing other places where there's hesitancy, and if it doesn't touch you or your family, you may not be as aware of it, but there are lots of families who are worried.
I couldn't agree more. It certainly resonates with the work that we see many of the firms and Giving Institute deal with. That the saying we hear the most is, bad news is not the enemy of generosity, but uncertainty. A question from our audience. If giving is seen as a form of social participation, then to what extent does political activity round out charitable giving?
That's so interesting, because there's the factor of the political year when you may be being tapped so much by the candidates you support or the party you support that you don't feel you can afford to also give to the local fire department or whatever it is you're giving to. I don't actually have data on that though, because I was struck by the fact that last time around, Nonprofits didn't suffer from it being an election
That's right.
year. It makes no sense, but I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to know it. But that's where you would see the problem. I think what we learned from the Do Good Institute is that one civic activity begets another. And whenever I really worry about citizen agency, which is my favorite thing to worry about, voting is up. I can think of no other, clearer measure of agency, that people are voting in record numbers or have in the last 2 rounds. So every time I worry about that, and I promise you I will continue to worry about it, and think about how civil society can help us all feel that we can, help ensure that we all do make a difference. It is certainly good news to know that people are showing up at the polls and expressing their preference in the candidate that is running for office then.
Right. Here's one. I'll be very interested to see what you think. Can philanthropy make up the funding gap left by government? And
No.
if so, how?
No. No. That's it. So far from being the case. How can I underline no? Organized philanthropy foundations have long had a really great business model, and that is take the risk, prove the solution, and then hand it over to either business or government to bring it to scale. It really worked. It's a brilliant model. It's suddenly vaporized. So foundations lost an essential partner in financing their goals. So, and if you take a look, if every foundation were to liquidate their assets, it would pale by comparison to the dollars lost. And I don't think we should only think about federal dollars. State dollars were lost as well. If you look at the Catholic Relief Services, huge amount from state as well as from federal. They're organizations you're not even aware that they get government grants. They get government grants at more than one level. It's been beneficial to society. It's made sense to sort of basically, set the policy in government and the execution by both companies and nonprofits. It made sense. Now we don't have that. So there are big areas where it still exists, but there are big areas of loss. I think the one that breaks my heart, Lee and I have been talking about physics. What would you expect 2 women standing at a dinner in Indianapolis? Gotta talk about physics. We talked about how much we love physics and how much her son loves physics. The science enterprise, it's just devastating, the loss of money there. And there's no way to make it up, even though private sector and philanthropic sector plays a big role. Not big. It just doesn't have the kinds of resources that are needed. I think that's the one that sort of gets me the most. But their whole fields like global health, global development, climate change mitigation. You name it. There are whole fields that lost what had been very substantial funding. I do a lot of meeting with foundation leaders. And a lot of meeting with grantee organizations. And there's sort of 3 levels on which they seem to be operating, the ones in which I deal with. Number 1 is how to change everybody's minds. It's the Bill Gates that goes to Congress and goes to President Trump and says, PEPFAR was a really good idea. Please fund it. So there's that. The first try to reverse a decision. The second level is to try to find alternate funding, and there's just suddenly foundations have become fundraisers, and trying to find new donors to help out. But the third and most interesting and most difficult is a process of reimagination. Take a field, let's say the science enterprise, and ask the question of how would you reimagine the financing of the science enterprise? I notice that Jamie Marasotis is nodding at that because he's been part of those kinds of conversations with other foundation leaders. How do we reimagine the whole thing? Because liquidating your assets, money is, foundations all together don't have enough to make up for the loss.
Thank you. And how often is it when the first response is nope?
But then I couldn't help but keep talking.
But but thank you. That's true. Here's another question from the audience. Development and fundraising have increasingly looked to be games of Moneyball in some respects, viewing it as positive to get double the money from half of the people. As you were saying before, many larger gifts, but fewer gifts overall. But fundraising and getting everyday donors is certainly important. How do you address the level of development strategies implementation? Are there first thoughts that would come to mind to you, for example, about how to expand that base?
So the Aspen Institute would be doing great if I knew the answer to that. But so let me just go on to say, look, the only logical way to fundraise is if you have to raise $1 million or $3 million in 2 months, is you go to the biggest donors. You can't do it with $25, gifts. So we've all developed strategies that go for the high end because it would be irrational not to. I see 2 reasons for developing everyday givers. Reason number 1 is longevity. You want the folks not just who can give today, but the folks who are going to be able to give tomorrow and are going to be with you for the long end and are going long term and appreciate the fact that you went to them before they could afford to give big. I cannot tell you the number of times when I was running nonprofits when a small giver suddenly became a big giver 20 years later, and having developed that relationship was really worth it. The question is how to get, I ran an organization when direct mail was new, right? Actually did really well because it was new, because it wasn't saturated, and telemarketing were new. Part of me sort of have always said, look, fundraising is relational. It is not transactional. You got to know the people. You got to sit down with them. You got to listen to their interests and their concerns and their passions. You can't just send a letter to 5,000 people. But the reality is we've learned you can combine them. GoFundMe tells you you can fundraise in a transactional way and not a relational way. But when it really works is when you open the door with efficient means, using, of course, AI. How could I have not said that? But then close the deal on the human level. So when this really dates me that direct mail was new and that telemarketing was new. But I used to sit in my office until 10 at night. We were on the East Coast, so we could be calling across the country where the time difference would vary. The call would be made, the person would sound very grumpy, and they'd say, oh, our executive director is here, she wanted to talk to you. And I'd get on the phone. We did so well because we moved from the efficiency of the automatic way to the human part. We did well. We'll have different opportunities that AI produces. It is not all as impersonal as it looks from here, or certainly if you're my generation, you disapprove of it terribly being impersonal. But in fact, the efficiencies are great. So I don't have the answer to your question, because if I did, I'd be just doing so well. But I can say that combining, not shying away from those efficiencies, but knowing that in the end it's always relational.
Thank you. One last question from the audience, and then one more final one. What role does social media play in influencing generosity and volunteerism? That's a good broad question for you.
Look, it reaches so many, it depends which social media, obviously, but using social media for fundraising purposes, for raising issues and raising organizations, it's hard to get better reach than that. And it's also because of algorithms possible to target your audiences, et cetera. So positive. Overall, I think we can't ignore the dividing effect of social media. The ways in which algorithms push us into our corners or invite us into our corners. And I'm very afraid that AI will sort of, deep fakes and disinformation will be, so our job, what seized us at the commission, is challenged by that kind of thing. Our desire to bridge divides, to find ways to come together, to solve together, to find out that you might disagree on 15 different things, but when you sit down together and you want to solve that problem, you find out that you think alike. And you find out that you have the same commitment to your community. We're far from that with social media, but social media can be used to bring us together. It just disturbs me that it's used so often to divide.
Thank you. And a final question. This goes back to the commission itself and the work that Mike and you led so well. As the commission was being stood up, you were certainly a big part of that, Jane, in making sure that the people around the table being recruited to be a part of it were certainly nonpartisan, but also were diverse in terms of the sectors from which they came. It was not a group of people who every day were involved in philanthropy. You had people from business and religion and media and you name it, every sector. I wonder if you would just take a few minutes to talk about what the impact of having a group like that was to the work of the commission and its final report by having a group that at the beginning you might not have selected as saying this is an homogenous group. This is a group of people from very different perspectives. What was that like and what was the result?
I think it's great that you slipped that in because you were the greatest advocate for that in the beginning. I was saying, well, look, I know all these foundation CEOs. Let's just get them in. And no. That's not the point. The point is to have a diverse group, not only, diverse in every way, but not only politically diverse, but also diverse in terms of the industries they came from. I ended up falling madly in love with the head of the Salvation Army, because he's just, I think it's a brilliant organization and has been for centuries, but he was also the most cheerful person I've ever met in my life. Ken Hodder is just a dream. If you ever find yourself on a commission, try to get Ken Hodder on it with you. We had people who had innovated in the worlds of giving. So Asha Curran from Giving Tuesday, Cecilia Conrad from Lever for Change. We had some more traditional foundation people, and we had someone from Gates, and we had Heather Templeton-Dill from the Templeton Foundation. The head of Ann May Chang, the head of Candid. So it was a full range. My other favorite guy in the world, Jerry Stead, who is an individual philanthropist with whom Ted is particularly close. So it was a great range. Ibu Patel from Interfaith. Folks coming from different perspectives. But what made it fun is the way we got around Ted's idea that there only be 17 commissioners. Now I get to tell you I really didn't like that idea. Because when you go to find diversity and you say, yeah, but the following 5 points of view are not represented, Ted. Anyway, we also sneaked around him by setting up task forces in different issue areas. So we had 54 people,
And that was brilliant.
Yeah, caught me. But Amir, we had, David King, your wonderful colleague. He's like the man on faith-based philanthropy. He chaired a committee on faith and giving. So we had, we had policy committee, we had arts, we had you name it, we had it, and that way we got a much more diverse source of recommendations and sources of wisdom. We were very lucky that way. The other place we gained from is that we held, not only did we underwrite sort of original research, but we also held focus groups of givers, both lapsed givers and current givers to get a sense from them of what motivated them, what got in their way. That was enormously valuable. So getting, and taking, we took testimony, of course, from folks from throughout the sectors, plural. But getting the widest variety was really important. I want to thank you for inviting us. So come on up and close us off.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jane and Ted, for joining us today and for sharing your vast experience in invigorating our philanthropic and civic spirit. I'm going to be thinking a lot about that citizen agency comment, and I hope all of us take these messages with us as we continue to do our best to invigorate our state and community. For those of you who want to share this presentation with others who couldn't be here today, or you want to relive it because, hey, there was a lot to take in, it will be available online at economicclubofindiana.com. And we hope you'll join us next month on December 16th as we welcome Kate Forbes. Was Kate involved in the commission? I don't know. No, she's the president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and it's a not-to-miss event, so we hope to see you there. So be sure to purchase your tickets today. And you can find out how to do that on our website, economicclubofindiana.com. Now, my last reminder, and I know you all were listening carefully earlier, if you parked in that Plaza Park garage, you need to make sure you get your QR code as you exit. See, there are folks over here who are waving their hands. You can get your QR code from them. And again, a thank you to Denison Parking for their generosity. We hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again in December. Thanks again.